Our final speaker in this part of the commemoration is John Cryer, the MP for Leighton and Wanstead, always taken a keen interest in Workers' Memorial Day and our work on health and safety. So we'll give in John the floor. John, fire away.
Thanks, Kevin. It's already been mentioned about what's been happening in India, the terrible scenes that we see night after night on our screens on the news, and it's one of the most worrying situations in the world. Not simply the virus, but the fact that the government and the Modi government seems to be moving increasingly towards a fascistic position, which has been going on for a long time, but it's gathering pace now. It's the way that they've tried to suppress dissent and coverage. They've arrested journalists who covered the suppression of figures. They've arrested MPs. There are a number of MPs who are now in custody without charge. It started with Kashmir, obviously this was before the pandemic, and now they've moved on to attacking minorities left, right and centre, and they won't stop, because I see in Modi's policies echoes of what happened in Italy in the 1920s and the 1930s, and attacking workers' organisations and trade unions, which he's doing day in, day out, and then suppressing coverage of the same. However, we're commemorating Workers' Memorial Day, and we usually tend to talk about domestic issues. So obviously over the past year and a half, we've had the pandemic. And I have to say, echoing what other people have said, right from the beginning, I had people who were trade unionists and non-trade unionists contacting me about the problems they were having, safety problems at work. And it covered bus workers. I had a lot of bus workers, a lot of bus drivers from different depots across London, but who happen to live in Leighton and Wanstead, contacting me about that. People from the Underground, RMT members, Unite members, GMB members, across the board. And it's interesting that at this stage, it looks like trade union membership, and this is possibly for the first time in many years, trade union membership looks like, these are initial figures, but it looks like it's starting to rise again for the first time for a long time. Now, if that is true, if that carries on, that's interesting, that we might be in a position where trade union membership and density will start to go up in the longer term. Now, on that basis, trade unions need a far better legal framework than they've had over the past few years. In the past 10 years, we've seen chipping away at trade union rights and trade union power. Most recently, the Trade Union Act, which was passed in the last Parliament. But before that, there were bills going through Parliament continually, which just chipped away here, chipped away there. To give you an example, 800,000 self-employed people were removed from health and safety cover. Now, after that, we've had the pandemic. What's happening to those people who've no longer got health and safety cover? They were exempted from the health and safety legal framework. I mean, that calls into some big questions. So what I'd like to see, I want to see some changes in the legal framework in the next few years, hopefully after the next election. For one thing, and this has been going on for a long time, changes to the Corporate Manslaughter Act. The Corporate Manslaughter Act means that you can sue companies, you can't sue individual directors. That's why there have been so few cases based on the Corporate Manslaughter Act. Individual directors need to be held responsible. So, for instance, this particularly applies to the construction industry, where you get firms who are responsible for fatalities or serious injuries. We all know what happens. They close down on the Friday, they reopen on the Monday under a different name, and you can't pursue them. Occasionally you get prosecutions, but it's pretty rare. The right of unions to enter workplaces, which has been a long-standing campaign by the trade union movement and has never been put on the statute book throughout British history. We ought to also see the extending of the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, first to construction, which has been a long-standing demand, like the others, but possibly into other areas as well. The creation of the GLA made quite a big difference in food processing particularly, but it needs to be extended to other areas, and they need to be properly resourced. What we've also seen over the past 10 years is that health and safety, all the health and safety institutions have seen cuts in finance, cuts in resources, cuts in staff. So they have not got the capacity anymore to inspect workplaces. Even when they can get inside, they haven't got the capacity to inspect workplaces. Now, those measures and others as well, it's not just that it would be fair to put those on the statute book, but there's another issue, and that is that migrant workers, particularly now, are particularly vulnerable. I'm contacted by a lot of migrant workers, and they're putting themselves in serious danger because if their immigration status isn't sorted out, and I spend a lot of my time trying to sort out people's migration status, their immigration status isn't sorted out, they're scared stiff of getting tested. They're scared stiff of reporting lack of safety at work. So they're hiding away, putting themselves in danger, putting their lives at risk simply by going to work, which is a completely unacceptable situation. I'll just finish by saying this. The idea that large-scale migration is something new, it's not. It's happened at various times in history. And after the war, I remember my best friend in Parliament till he was defeated the last election was Dennis Skinner. And Dennis started working in the mines in Derbyshire in 1948, 47, something like that. And I can vividly remember him telling me that after the war, just before he was a miner, his dad was a miner, just after the war, there were a lot of migrant workers in the British coalfields. This is often forgotten. I mean, it's not really written about or talked about, but there were pits where you would hear Italian spoken, or Serbo-Croat, or Polish, or Russian. That was quite common in the 1940s and 1950s. When people talk about migration, very often what they're actually talking about is undercutting. And when they're talking about undercutting, that's what fuels racism. And what happened then was that an agreement was struck with the National Union of Mine Workers, which meant that migrant workers got exactly the same treatment as the indigenous workforce. And I can remember Danny saying to me, after that, the tensions just disappeared because there were no longer objections, because everybody got equal treatment. If we can get back to that, that would be a real victory if we could have that kind of agreement, that kind of equality of treatment. And that means, I'll just finish on this, that means addressing the Agency Workers Directive. The Agency Workers Directive was passed, what, 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. And it's hardly worth the paper it's written on. It doesn't give any real protection to agency workers. And I know because I organised a trade union campaign for it. What we got almost worthless. If we had a real agency workers directive, which gave real protection to agency workers, many of whom are migrants, it would make a big difference. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. I welcome the comments, and I'm sure the Trades Council will, about the possibilities to amend unjust laws. And I hope, obviously, if any further anti-trade union or anti-health and safety bills come before Parliament, that you and the PLP will vigorously oppose that in conjunction with your trade union colleagues. So thank you very much on that.